victimhood culture, I would describe it as a mental plague of a person staying in a nation like this and having to search out oppression.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brandon Lewis, founder of the Tennessee Conservative, and today we are joined by Patrick Hampton, VP of Communications and Community Engagement at Hamilton Flourishing. Before we get into the program, if you would please subscribe to the Tennessee Conservative. 93% of reporters do not identify as conservatives, and we try to bring you angles and questions and guests that they'll never bring you. So please, before you leave the program, follow us, YouTube, Facebook, you know what I'm trying to say here, Parler, whatever the new widget is that's out there today, so that we can get you local conservative news in the Chattanooga area. Patrick serves as a voice of strength for his generation. Mr. Hampton's role as minister, educator, charter school administrator, advocate, and strategist have led to hundreds of speaking requests around the world. Hampton is passionate about his work. He asserts the citizens of today are the grassroots leaders of today. If we fail to engage Hamilton County citizens and sow the seeds of true education and empowerment to the next generation of leaders, we will be forced to reap the weeds of our ignorance versus the flower of our love for tomorrow. Patrick is married to his middle school sweetheart. Middle school sweetheart. Good. Man. You make me feel a little weak in that department. Middle school, okay. Sweetheart, Sharinda. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. It was close. Hampton, and they have 4 handsome boys, Caleb, Joshua, Israel, and Noah. Patrick, welcome to the program, buddy. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Brandon, I really appreciate you for inviting me on, and thank you for doing this. This is needed in our community. So you're one of my heroes.
Oh, well, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for heroes then. That's what we're doing. So I'm glad to be here, and just trying to make sure that we can get conservative news out to the community, because we have not up until this point had a conservative news outlet. And if you're like me, you read the headlines and you read the stories, and not only do they skew the facts, they ask the wrong questions.
Yes.
And you cannot write a good article. You cannot get the news out if you're already asking the wrong question. So we're going to try to ask the right question. And today, the topic of our conversation is really how the culture of victimhood pushes success out of reach. And it's something that I've watched you write about. It's something you know a lot more about and have spoken about and have written about more than me. And I appreciate what you do with your platform. It takes a lot of guts to do what you do. So first things first, before we get into the serious stuff about the culture of victimhood, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you outside of your professional career and your work in the community? I just always like to know a little bit about people. What do you do in your free time? And you have a bunch of kids, you probably don't have much free time, but what are your hobbies outside of politics, outside of community involvement? Just talk a little bit about that.
Wow. Well, that's a great question. I never really get asked that question, but my free time is mostly with my family. Like you just read, I married my middle school sweetheart. We've been together since, I was 14 years old, and
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
we started having kids, after we were married in our 20s. And so my biggest hobby is actually fathering my boys. I mentored kids in the inner city communities for about a decade. And I got a lot of intelligence from children and young men saying what they needed from their father. And I took all of that information and intelligence, and I'm now pouring it into my boys. I love teaching them how to drive, teaching them how to respond to girls, and teaching them just about culture and life. And that's really what my hobby is. I love baseball. I've coached all of my boys through baseball. My son.
That takes a lot of dedication.
Oh yeah, my 15-year-old son just committed to college. He's the #1 outfielder in Tennessee.
Wow.
So he committed to the University of South Carolina. And so at 15 years old, that's a huge accomplishment for him. So I just love coaching my boys and mentoring my boys.
That is cool. I mean, I had a friend, one of my mentors growing up. my dad passed on when I was 19, and then even before then, we just had this whole single parent family, not very good situation going on, and a doctor, Garrett, who's a veterinarian, kind of took me under his wing and really showed me that showed me a picture of normalcy I had never seen. And he coached his kids through baseball. He's got two that went on to play ball in school, and Buddy, I thought 10, 15 years of being a ball coach. And then his kids went off to
Yeah.
school, and he's like, what am I supposed to do? Like he just his whole he didn't know what to do with his time anymore. So one day you'll have to get another hobby. It's
Oh
coming.
yeah.
So
Maybe I'll just start umpiring or something.
I could see somebody like him doing that, and you too. So I've followed your writings, comments, and posts on Facebook. Your profile, I know you use other mediums, but that's what I see the most. And I've watched you discuss, the culture of victimhood directly and indirectly in your post. Talk a little bit about that culture. What is it exactly? Sometimes it's something we hear and see, but the left and the liberal news outlets, they never take any time to articulate it and why it's harmful or any other
Mhm.
side of it. They just use it as um, this propeller for their initiative. So talk a little bit about it and exactly what is it, where is it coming from, and when do people start being introduced to it?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question as well. When we talk about victimhood culture, you first have to understand one thing is that we stay in the greatest nation on the earth. Okay. And so when we have people that stay in this country and stay and is a part of this nation, the fact that they have to search out oppression and search out victimhood and search out suffering, that
Mm-hmm.
says a lot in and of itself. Victimhood culture, I would describe it as a mental plague of a person staying in a nation like this and having to search out oppression from, I mean, different walks of life. For instance, I can give you um, an example. Like, for instance, they say just because you are a white man, you are oppressing Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Not, you haven't done anything, you haven't said anything, but victimhood culture is comes from critical race theory that believes that white people oppress others simply by the color of their skin. And what we're seeing is, we're like you just said, we're seeing the left use this as a tool to get a whole community in their emotions and
Mm-hmm.
in their feelings to and drive them to the voting polls to vote for the left, simply by saying that America is racist. White men are racist. Not only if you're a white man, but if you are a heterosexual man, that's a second level of oppression. So that's what victimhood culture is. It's no way around it. There's really no cure for it. It's simply a mental plague on a community.
So, it's funny. I know a lot of people talk about or think about the other side of it, which is, like if you're any of the mainstream boxes, if you're white, if you're Christian, if you're living in middle America, if you have what they call, I guess occasionally you hear them call bourgeois values, which is like, really what my grandpa advocated for, which is get a haircut, get a
Right.
job, get married, stay married, even if you fuss and fight forever, just tough it out. The
Right.
stuff that is just, you show up to work on time, like you do what your boss asks you to do, and you'll get a raise. I mean, just very simple, easy things that
Mhm.
are now shunned. But we're going to talk about this later. Um, but really, when I look at it, I think about what it does to the people that buy into it, which we'll get into later in the interview.
Yeah.
So, where do you see this taking hold the most? And not necessarily what the left does to it, but where do you see this taking hold the most? What ages, what communities? Because, in my opinion, it causes a lot more damage to the people who believe it than it does the people that it's used against.
Right.
The people that it's used against, it may be politically uncomfortable. It does have political ramifications, but if you buy into it, I mean, it has a profound effect on you, your personality. I think it has an effect on your spirit. Um, Tell me a little bit about where you see it taking hold and
Mhm.
and what kinds of problems it causes.
Well, from my perspective, I see a lot of it in the Black community, and and if you really have to study this, because I've really taken a lot of time to figure out what the problems are and how can we solve the problems in the Black community. But when you go back to slavery, you'll find out, like, right after slavery, once the Emancipation and Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln, that generation, right after the generation that was in slavery, they started their own businesses. They went out. You had Madam C.J. Walker, you had Booker T. Washington, that started their own
Hmm.
education institutes and colleges and universities. So they, out of the gate of slavery, they realized what they needed to do to be successful. But what you had on the flip side, you had those slave owners that had to figure out a way to get Black people back on the plantation. And they did this by creating a victimhood culture and making them victims as if they couldn't take care of themselves
Hmm.
without them being on the plantation. This leads all the way down into the 60s to LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, and his Great Society policies of him actually trying to help the Black community by creating policies like, if you stayed in government housing, um, you couldn't have a man in the home. And
Wow.
yes, yes, and
I
those,
did not even I did not even know that part.
yes, it's called Great Society, the Great
No, I knew that
Society
that happened, but
laws.
like that particular, I mean, that just breaks the family up.
Yeah. And so, and what ends up happening when you do that, you take the man out of the home. Now you make this woman that may have children or multiple children. Now she is actually becomes a victim of these policies. And then now you want their vote. So the Democrats, because they had, or the left, they lost the votes of Black people. This was their way of getting Black people to vote Democrat, is to create these policies where they're giving them these welfare programs and
Hmm.
things to keep them on this new plantation. So basically, what happened in the Black community, they just switched plantations. They went from agriculture to now they're on the government plantation, living off of the government. And so those programs were designed for it to be temporary, but now it became permanent because the
Hmm.
left wanted permanent voters. And so that's how victimhood became a culture in the Black community.
Well, it ain't just a culture in the Black community. I grew up in in a place called Dog Holler, which people drop their stray dogs off, like ramshackle trailers and shacks, going up the mountain toward Arab, Alabama. And my cousins and many of my immediate family members, they got caught in that plantation, that vote
Yeah.
harvesting plantation, and
Hmm.
it leads to men, able-bodied, young, good-looking men, had their world, their life ahead of them, and their whole goal in life was to get on the Alabama lottery, which is a
Hmm.
disability check. I mean, one of my cousins even shot himself to get on it. I
Wow.
mean, it's that kind of stuff. And I've got other relatives and friends that have, you know, multiple children, no fathers, stuck in the same government housing for generations.
Mm.
And so it happens on both sides. And
Yeah.
it's people think that it's charity when it's almost like you walk up to somebody and you vaccinate them against success.
Right.
Like you just
It's
say, well, would you like to, if you would like to greatly reduce your chances of having any personal dignity or upward mobility, would you please, here's a check. And buddy,
right.
you put somebody in a wheelchair long enough and you tell them they can't walk, and you push them around long enough and tell them they can't walk, about 10 years goes by, that they'll probably believe they can't walk.
Yeah.
And it will get up. Your legs are perfectly fine. No, I can't walk. And so
Right.
I've seen a lot of this. So,
And it gets to the point actually to where the government actually starts to incentivize bad choices.
yeah,
And that's what ends up happening. And that's how you get caught up into being a victim. And you stay in that state. And then when you have a party that comes alongside of you that tells you, listen, you're a victim or you're in this situation because of this party or this group of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it becomes a culture and it's hard to break and it's hard to get out of it.
Oh, it's hard. And I've never understood it because I saw what it did to people I cared about, and it did nothing. I mean, the people that get out of that trap are far and few between. I mean, it's
Hmm.
hard. Once they get you in that trap, it's very difficult to get out of it. And you try to help people. It's like, but then they don't really want. After a while, at the beginning, there's a little bit of, and I've watched this because I've seen dozens of people walk through this, like personally,
Hmm.
friends, family. I watch them walk through that door, and at the beginning, they kind of want to get out of it, and they
Hmm.
don't want to be a victim. But then after a while, it's their livelihood, and it
Hmm.
becomes a profession. And it as much as you want to try to help them, they're not able to receive it as easily. So we talk about how it keeps people from reaching their full potential. But what do you think are some of the answers to combating this? I mean, obviously there's policy that can be done. There are community actions and organizations that can be involved. There's
Hmm.
simple messaging. I mean, sometimes it's the right book at the right time. It's the right mentor at the right time. It's the right. I mean, there's 5 or 6 different spheres of influence that can be brought to bear here to bring
Hmm.
people out of this victim culture. What do you see as some of the answers?
Well, one of the things that I've seen, I would say around 2014, um, I actually went into inner city communities wanting to help the younger people see the culture for what it was and to
Mhm.
want something better. And what I did, I actually started a summer program. It was sponsored by Goodwill, and I called it a work ethic summer program because I wanted to infuse work ethic into this community. I wanted them to know what that word meant. I wanted them to know what it felt like to actually work and earn a living. And so I actually did this summer camp for 3 years. It was killed by Obamacare. That's a whole nother story. But I went into the community and I went to schools and I said, I want the 12 to 15-year-old kids that don't have anything to do in the summer. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to have them 4 days a week. Friday, they can be off and still have their summers. But I want them 4 days a week. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to teach them the history of work ethic from the perspective of Frederick Douglass. So I would show them how Frederick Douglass, or let's say I'll just give you a day of how it went. So they would come to me in the summer at 8 o'clock. We would have a class, and I would teach them about Frederick Douglass and how Frederick Douglass went from being a slave to advising 5 presidents
Wow.
and dying a millionaire. And the reason I'm doing that because I'm showing them that this is a person that was born way below poverty. When you're born a slave, you're born below poverty, way below. And to see that he, through work ethic, worked himself all the way up. He taught himself to read. He wrote 5 autobiographies and advised 5 presidents. And actually was the one that convinced Lincoln to free the slaves. And so we would teach him about that, or Booker T. Washington, or all of these people that worked hard to be successful. So they would have that in the morning, and then in the evenings or in midday, I would take them to a Goodwill store and they would job shadow for 2 hours. So they learn how to work a cash register. They learn how to take a bed off of the back of a truck. They learn how to tag clothes. They learn how to mop floors. They learn how to sort clothes. And it was just 2 hours. And a 12-year-old learning that for
Oh
two
yeah.
hours, their legs were hurting. They were saying, oh, I didn't know. I was like, well, this is what work is. And then I would take them to a company to job shadow. We would go to Covenant, or we would come to a company like yours, and we would talk to a CEO, and they would tell them how hard they worked to create this company. So at the end of the summer, of 8 weeks of doing that for 4 days a week, the kids had a mindset of what work ethic was. And so I did that for 3 years. And then when they turned 16, I would give them their first job and their first check at a Goodwill store.
Man,
Okay.
that is awesome. And people do not realize, in my opinion, the younger you can get a kid working. I got started working when I was 13 at that vet's office. I worked 13, I guess, till I was 18 or 19,
Mm-hmm.
scooping dog mess out of the runs and, holding stinky dogs so that,
Right.
whatever Dr. Garrett or the staff were doing, and chasing cows and emus and pigs and, being in the muck and the mire at,
Right.
early in the morning to late in the evening. And when you do that stuff and you learn how to work early, it gets in your DNA and you
Yes.
can, you can carry that forward. But if you don't see that until you're 20, 21, 22, it is a
Right.
rude awakening in life.
Yeah.
So that is awesome that you did that. So what we got that, we've also got, policies, public policies. I think
Yes.
things that I do believe that private organizations, businesses, and charities will always do a better job in every
Mm-hmm.
instance, almost than government policy. However, policy is really important, and we should hold our government accountable to do those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of policies, do you think aid aid that effort to make people feel empowered that their life is within their control, that they're living in a land of opportunity and abundance,
Mm-hmm.
and that whatever happens to them is really just almost entirely up to them. What
Mm-hmm.
kind of policies do you think would
Well,
move us in
I
that direction?
yes, I can actually cite one of the policies that actually Trump is supporting right now and that he's created for some of these minority communities, and that is he created opportunity zones.
Hmm.
And these opportunity zones are zones where there are not a lot of businesses, or businesses have left that area for whatever reason. It may be, crime, it may be high taxes, it may be, they're not fixing the roads or whatever. But if it's an opportunity there for businesses to open, Trump has infused, I believe it was like five, and it's called the Platinum Plan, where he's infusing $500 billion for minorities to start their own businesses in those communities to bring those communities back. Or not just minority, anyone that wants to start a business to
Yeah.
help those people. Like, for instance, we see LeBron James complaining about, all this stuff that's going on. Well, how about open up a shoe factory in one of those neighborhoods and hire those people to
Hold
make those
yeah,
shoes?
hold your breath for that, bud.
Yeah, they right. And so, but see, they complain about it, but those are some of
Oh
the
yeah.
things that can be done. And like it's like Trump has made them an opportunity zone. So you get all of these tax benefits for doing it, but you don't see these guys doing it. And so I think that is a way to help because a lot of times when government comes in or someone else comes in to do it, the community don't own it. But when you have people from the community that understands, okay, I
Yeah.
can start a business, I can be an entrepreneur, they kind of own that, and then you'll see others, be courageous and do the same thing.
You're absolutely right. And tell you what, I mean, if you think about even the transformation of downtown from a kind of a crime-ridden place that nobody wanted to go to, I mean, that was not that was that was a lot of private citizens and a lot of
Yes.
business investment with a little bit of a helping hand from the local government. But all the
Hmm.
good stuff that really happens, I mean, it really is grassroots level, because entire when your entire livelihood and your family's livelihood and your personal reputation are tied up in an endeavor,
Hmm.
you don't half-ass that stuff. And
Right.
you get in those communities and you work, and that's one thing that's always broken my heart about the combination. We're getting off track here, but both the lockdowns and the and a lot of the rioting is people. It's like they act like these small businesses don't matter, and
Mhm.
that and some people can't make a living behind a laptop. I mean,
Right.
I work with contractors all over the United States, and can't make a living behind a laptop. You got to be right
Right.
there with somebody in close proximity doing things. Otherwise, your family doesn't get fed, and you can give people subsistence, but for most
Right.
men and women, I mean, it's soul crushing not to be doing something productive.
Right.
You can get the substance for doing it, but it's not the same as getting out and doing it. So
Right.
other than, we talked about the platinum program, is there anywhere else where you see real progress in pushing back against maybe not necessarily programs and maybe not necessarily policy or community organizations, but where do you see messaging that is effective? Because that's a big part of it, because ideas, words, messages, radio ads,
Mhm.
celebrity communication, the news media, it's the messaging that is
Mhm.
repeatedly put in front of people, and after a while it takes hold. And
Right.
good ideas lead to good places, bad ideas lead to bad places. So where have you seen some messaging that you think is taking hold, that's kind of putting some cracks in the facade of this victimhood culture?
Well, I don't know if you follow him at all, but Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, they have been very effective in going on college campuses to get young people excited again about free markets and capitalism. That's really, if you want to get to the core of the issue, is really the miseducation of students in our public school system um, about capitalism. They are being taught that capitalism is a bad thing, and that they're like you
Yeah.
said earlier, they're being oppressed, and only white people or the white man is benefiting from capitalism. And so that's why I like what Charlie does, is that he goes on campuses with these college students without a college degree. He doesn't have a college degree, and that's how Candace Owens got her start as well. Neither one of them have a college degree, but they went on these campuses to talk about free market systems and what it means to be an entrepreneur, and how this system, or this education system, and being in debt $150,000
Mm.
is not helping people. And so that's what I think needs to happen. I think if more and more people like yourself and people like myself begin to let people know our stories, how you came from where you came from and started a business that's impacting so many lives. And me telling my story of, how I grew up and having a
Mm.
father in the home, those messages matter. And I think we need to start teaching it at a very young age. There are books out there, the Total Twins. I don't know if you've
I've
heard of
seen
them or
seen the
not.
advertisements. Yeah, I know
Yes, the Total
we had
Twins.
the
That
one
is
of
a
the
very good series for kids to learn about our government in America.
well, it is. I can't remember what it was. I think we bought. I differ with her on matters of faith, but the Atlas Shrugged is such a good. I mean, God knows you couldn't read 700 pages of that slow moving stuff to a kid, but they wrote a little a story about it with and Atlas was the strong man in the circus, and then you had, of course, kind of disparaging the clowns.
Right.
Clowns wanted to, and I read that to my child when she was very young, and she's like, "Daddy, why did the clown?" I mean, a kid knows instinctively, right? And I was like, why do the clowns want to take the strong man's money? I was like, well, there's a lot of clowns out there that want to take
Yeah.
the strong man. So you have to
Right.
teach them that. So it's been an honor having you on the program. If people want to learn more about what you do at Hamilton Flourishing, or just learn more about what you do yourself, where would they go to get that information?
Well, you can follow Hamilton Flourishing on Facebook, and you can follow me as well. I have a podcast that I'm doing. I actually had to stop doing it during COVID because I was teaching my children at home, but I'm going to get it started back up. It's called The Patrick Perspective. So you can go to The Patrick Perspective on Facebook, or you can find me at Patrick D. Hampton on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter as well as Patrick D. Hampton. Or you can go to my website and read some of my writings from the Patriot Post at www.patrickdhampton.net.
Yeah, if you don't have the D in there, I don't know who the other Patrick Hampton is, but it's not going to
Right.
be nearly as good. It's going to be a knockoff version.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'd really want to talk about before we close is if somebody's watching this, you never know. You never know. If somebody's watching this and they're having a hard time of it, they've bought into some of this. Uh, Everything's somebody else's fault, or everything is some system's fault, or my situation is untenable and I can't ever get past it unless somebody gets into the White House or something else happens externally. What would you tell someone like that who feels like that they can't get out of where they are, that their future is tied up and is in someone else's hands?
Yeah. Well, I would tell a person like that to, first of all, that you have to look here. You have to, one, believe that God created you for a purpose. You have to believe that you are on this earth for a purpose, and there is nothing that another man can do that you can't do. You have to understand that you were created equal. Even though people out there that says that, there's all of these inequalities and all of this stuff out there, you have to believe that you were created equal by God. That was Martin
Amen.
Luther
Yeah.
King. That was one of his main messages, that we were created equal by God. Once you do that, you have to realize that you can work just as hard as the next man to be successful. Success, there is nowhere in the dictionary about work or success coming before work, or
No.
work becoming before success. You have to believe that you got to work hard to be successful. So I would tell people that having a proper attitude, showing up on time is important. Appreciating those that help you, that's very important. Another thing that I teach people, when you are in a situation where you feel like that you want to give up and you can't see anywhere else to go, stop right there, ask God for direction, pray, and look for God to show you a way out. The scripture says that he will never put more on you than you can bear. So I would leave a person with that and say, listen, work hard, be successful, and put God first.
Man, that is a good place to leave it. And I'm right there with you. I've watched scores of people, from drug addiction, awful financial situations, ruined, wrecked marriages, awful childhood situations. If you put the inputs in, the outputs will follow. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in some kind of, you know, old faithful geyser of
Right.
immediate results. But buddy, if you just keep slogging, if you keep trying to look for the resources, I mean, you may get knocked down a couple of times, but I've yet to see a human, and I've coached hundreds of small business owners.
Hmm.
If they will just put in the time and the effort, I've never seen one really fail. I've never
Right.
seen one fail. I've never
Mm.
seen one regress that
Hmm.
much. And so I just wish, it breaks my heart when people think that they can't succeed, because I don't see any evidence for that. I
Right.
personally have not seen any evidence of that. I've
Mm.
seen exactly the opposite. So I'm
Right.
so glad to have you on this program. It's been a great visit. Hopefully some folks picked up something and can leave some of these, some of these messages about victimhood behind that have
Hmm.
crippled so many for so long. So if you've enjoyed this program, please go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com. And you can also follow us on Parler, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever they've not shadow banned us or in the process of doing yet. Until next time, I'm Brandon Lewis with the Tennessee Conservative, where hopefully socialism dies in daylight. Take care.